Howdy, 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 and welcome back to the Garden Nerd. On today's episode, I'm going to be doing some soil tests. I've done one already, and now I'm doing number 2. Basically what I'm doing is, they're about a day apart. I did the first soil test. I grabbed the soil, and I did that, and I'll show you the recording of that there. And now I've pulled the soil, and I have it ready to go, and I'll show you kind of the steps that I followed to do that, and then just kind of the outcome and kind of discuss what I think of my soil overall. Alrighty folks, let's get to it. Getting the soil tests for the soil, basically what I just did here is, at the sites that I chose, I'm going 3 scoops down, so that's about 4 to 6 inches respectively. And that's going to get down to the lower levels of soil where the plant's roots will mainly be. Then I'm just going to go through and just put the soil back in the holes, so this way, kind of just stays where it is. And I kind of will shake it up each time, just kind of get it nice and loose. And the next spot here is the rustic raised bed. I'm just going to, again, go down 2 scoops, use the 3rd scoop down, get that subsoil where most of the plant roots will be. This is supposedly so this way you can have a better idea of what the soil actually is, because when you put all the compost and stuff on top, it's going to leach downward into the subsoil where the roots will be. So this is supposed to give you the accuracy of the test. But as you can see, I kind of choose random spots vaguely in the middle, because I just kind of figured that'd be good. Now, the next step when preparing your soil for the soil test is to mix it all together. Make sure you kind of get rid of all the clumps and stuff, and then I'll just kind of mix it together and make sure that it's fairly homogeneous, so this way you can get the average of the soils. You could do a soil test for each and every garden bed if you wanted, which is doable, particularly with these store-bought ones. Now what I'm doing here is I'm following the instructions. It is a 5-to-1 ratio. You do like 1 amount of soil, and then you're going to do 5 parts water. They do suggest distilled or bottled water, so this way it's more, has like less nutrients and stuff from like tap water that can kind of supposedly leach from pipes and other sources. So I just used some bottled water. I think it should be okay. I've done that in the past with other store-bought ones, and that is fine. Alright, so then what I'm just going to do is I'm going to mix it all together. This is to kind of make sure everything's mixed and you get a nice good consistency for the Alright, so it's the next day, and it's been sitting there, and it's kind of separated into the different layers. So now it's kind of ready to go. If it's murky, that's fine. Alright, so this is the basic test kit that it came with it. You have like the pH, the nitrogen, the phosphorus, and the potassium, and these blue pills and green pills and the corresponding pills have the chemicals in there to do the tests. I've added the liquid and shaken it up and waited the approximate 10 minutes so I can get the reading here. And then what you do is just hold it up to the light. They suggest daylight just so you can get a good read here. And you just kind of figure out on which part it is. So on this one, it's somewhere between 3 and 4 sufficient and surplus. I think I decided surplus on that one. The phosphorus test, you can see little speckles that are floating in there. That's the chemical that's used, and they do suggest that you need to shake it up. If that happens, which I just did, you can see that it is that much darker blue, which is more closer to the surplus on this particular test. And that is the nitrogen test. So as you can see there, it's, you know, not exact, kind of gives you a guesstimate here, but from what I can tell, that's between the deficiency and the depleted. So I'm not terribly surprised, because I know I don't really add too many nitrogen like fixing things into my soil. I have added a lot of compost, but yeah. And this is how you do the pH test. So basically you just put the soil to that little dotted line and then the chemicals in, and then you just kind of fill it up with the sample water, and then bada boom, bada bing, you shake it up, and boom. And you can kind of get a rough estimate of what your pH is. So I figured this was just about neutral, maybe slightly more acidic, because it kind of has like a little bit more of a, you know, yellowy hue green. So it's definitely a lighter green, so I figured we're neutral to slightly pH, which is perfectly good for vegetables. Neutral is fine. If you had more fruit ones, you want it to be more acidic, but you definitely don't need to worry about that too much there. Alright, so here is my little rough layout of the garden here. Not the scale, just kind of gives me like a rough idea of things here. Kind of helps me keep things planned. I also just kind of have like stuff that I filled out for the years to just kind of help me track things. But on this one here is where I'm just kind of marking where I took soil samples. You'll note that there are different colors in the different beds here. Like we have red ones there, a red one there, and then two red ones here, and down here as well. So those guys there were the test 2. Test 1 was the black spots there, 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 and there. So just to give you kind of a thing, grapevine here, this is the rustic raised bed, concrete bed there. Then that's where the garlic currently is with hoops, and that's the lasagna garden. The central one, and then the weaved one, the one that doesn't have anything in it might be a compost bin. This spot isn't actually here anymore. And then there's this spot up front, closest to the road there. Then over in the back, that's just like the back jamming garden area. And then over here is like the H bed that's kind of in the front. And then we have the trial beds over here. But I just want to give you just a brief overview so this way you know what you're looking at. So yeah, you can just kind of see where I've marked where the different tests were, just so this way I can kind of keep a rough idea of how things are looking. Now for the results. Zoom in a little bit so y'all can see. So right here, I have the different years that I've done it. I did one in 2015. It was a slightly different scale, as you can see here, but I matched it up with the current test kit that I'm using there and there. So you can see I kind of color-coded it, red being bad, like the orange color being low, medium being yellow, where it says, you know, adequate, then sufficient is the green because you want to be sufficient, or high, and then very high is the surplus. First we'll go over the pH line here. They are both been about roughly neutral, so 7, maybe a little bit more on the acidic side, which is perfectly good for the veggies. Then for the nitrogen here, so across the board, unsurprisingly, the nitrogen hasn't been great. It was probably kind of bumped up in the intermittent years when I had some manure brought in. That probably boosted it up then, but not dramatically enough to keep going, because nitrogen is one of those things that get used up quite quick. So yeah, you can see here it was from the low depleted area, and then the following, and then about 4 years later when I did the test again, we are at depleted to not great. Oh, that wasn't supposed to be. Hang on. There we go. We fixed it. So you can kind of see there. This was the first test. That's the second test there. Now moving on to the phosphorus. I have high phosphorus initially when I started, and then we went to surplus on both tests there. So I'm not terribly surprised, because I know there was a lot of phosphorus in the soil to begin with, and I was adding a lot of compost, which had a lot of coffee grounds throughout the years, so that is not super surprising. And then potassium, pretty much the same thing. We went from a mid to adequate level to surplus to sufficient. So mainly out of the three main nutrients for the plants, the nitrogen is going to be the one that actually needs some work here. So yeah, that's basically the little sciencey part of it. I'm going to now talk about the soil structure itself. So you can test your soil just to kind of see what kind of type you have by simply using a mason jar. I'm just going to use the image here from just this. You can do a separate test with that, but I figure you can kind of do both. It is better to do it with more soil, because you can see here it's kind of harder to see here. But you'll be able to see separate layers, and that will tell you which soil structure is which. So you can kind of see there, it goes into 3 layers. The first one's going to be the sandy layer, the next is going to be the silty layer, and the next is going to be the clay. So the sand layer is what you just think of it. It's the larger particles, like sand, little rocks like that, and that kind of will make up your soil. And then the next layer is going to be the silt layer, and that's kind of like the loam type thing. And then the top little, generally thinnest layer, at least on my particular one, is the clay layer. Each of these are important when it comes to the soil structure, but just kind of gives you like a rough idea. So like mine is more of a loam, like a sandy loam, because it's more silt than clay, so it wouldn't be like a clay soil, which I knew that just by the structure. But you can kind of get a rough idea of kind of like what your soil is in that particular way. So that's just like a neat little thing. So if you decide to do your own soil test, or you're just kind of wondering about the composition of your soil, you just kind of take a mason jar, fill it with soil, shake it up, and you just let it settle.